So with that, let me introduce our amazing keynote speaker to open us up, Sylvia Acevedo. Sylvia Acevedo is a woman of determination. She was determined to be a great basketball player. And so she, before dinner every night, would go out and make sure that she sank 100 free shots before she could go into dinner. Tells you a little bit about the determination that started her off. She was determined to go places, and going places took her from Las Cruces, New Mexico to Stanford University to the NASA Space Propulsion Laboratory, where she was a genuine rocket scientist. She was determined to provide opportunities for all of our students. She started a number of organizations, and I remember still very clearly when we were meeting down at a coffee shop down near the Austin ISD old headquarters, asked her to become the founding board chair of E3 Alliance over 15 years ago. And she's determined to help young women and girls, not just in her own communities, but throughout the United States, where she went on to take her creativity, her experiences, to become the Girl Scouts CEO, the national CEO of the Girl Scouts. And further, she wanted to reach more young women and men by writing a book about how we can be inspired to reach for, not just from where we're going, from where we are to where we're going, but all the way to the stars. Sylvia has been a role model to so many people, and she is my personal friend. I'm proud to introduce this morning, Sylvia Acevedo.
Good morning, and thank you very much for that introduction, Susan. You know, I do remember meeting you at Swedish Hill, and you were wearing your trademark Lucchese boots. And you talked to me about your vision, and the vision was, how can we unite as a community, improve educational outcomes for everyone in Central Texas? And by doing that, we'll create a workforce that will power the future of Austin and its prosperity. Well, if you look around Austin now, it's very prosperous, but there's challenges and clearly some gaps, you know, economic gaps, disparity gaps, and really the lingering challenges of COVID. And, you know, I'm so grateful that you're really looking at an acceleration because, you know, I think that really is part of the DNA of E3, of how do you accelerate change and to make sure that all boats rise. And I'm really honored, yes, to have been the inaugural chair, and I'm incredibly proud of all the success of E3 and the community coming together to improve educational outcomes. So I'm honored to be your keynote morning speaker. And I want to start with a question. And the question is, you know, you've heard about how I was introduced, you know, rocket scientist, engineer, Stanford grad, White House commissioner, tech exec, CEO of the Girl Scouts, and now corporate board member. And that's one way to introduce me, but there's another way. A girl who grew up on dirt roads. All my grandparents were from Mexico. My mom was born in Mexico, grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, Mexican household, very traditional. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes we ran out of money and had to go live with family. So I ask you, how did that girl go from those dirt streets and dirt roads and all those challenges to become me? Well, that's going to be really the topic of my conversation with you. And, you know, when I was living on those dirt roads, the health conditions were so bad, there was an epidemic. So not only did we have economic challenges, we had this epidemic, a meningitis epidemic. And it swept through, and unfortunately people died. And my sister, it affected her tremendously and forever altered her brain. But there was a ray of hope at that time, and it was a Head Start pilot program. And many families in our neighborhood didn't want to send their kids to this Head Start program because of the epidemic that had just swept through. They didn't want to have their kids congregate. But my mom, maybe because she was dealing with my younger sister and wanted to just have me do something else for a while, had me enroll in the Head Start program. And I'm so grateful that she did, because I had a great teacher. And that great teacher, even as a young child, noticed I wasn't interested in arts and crafts. And during the weekly show and tell, it really wasn't my jam. And she noticed that, but she noticed I liked books. And so instead of doing a show and tell, she asked me to talk about the books. And so I learned about books' narratives, even if it was as simple as Dick and Jane and what did Sally do with Spot. But that really got me interested in books and reading. And then that gave me confidence. And then that confidence really gave me a big confidence in being able to read. I'm really grateful for that because my mom noticed that the only neighborhood in Las Cruces that suffered that epidemic was our dirt neighborhood. And so she moved us to an area where the streets were paved. But the teacher at my new school, she didn't think very highly of my former school. And she had a stack ranking in her class, and she put me at the very last class row furthest away from her. And I remember the boy in front of me turns around on my very first day and said, "Now you're the dumbest one in class." However, she had us do a weekly reading assignment. And as we started reading, they finally got to me. Well, remember, that was something I could really do. I was confident and I read so well that she immediately moved my desk further up in the class. And I remember being very grateful for that Head Start program because that interest in reading gave me confidence and really gave me a lot of confidence. But I still didn't really like that school. I waited till the end of the Captain Kangaroo every morning, and then I would just wait till it was almost over, and then I'd run to school so I wouldn't be late. And I'd go home from school to home to eat lunch every day just because I didn't like it. But again, fortunately for me, a girl followed me one day and really pestered me to join her in an after-school program. And I'm grateful that she did, because that was the Girl Scouts. And in the Girl Scouts, it taught me two fundamental things that forever changed my life. And the things that I learned were things that are as applicable now as they were then. And, you know, my family, I love Girl Scouts, but my family, we really struggled economically, living paycheck to paycheck. And I wanted to do everything, but we didn't have the means for that. But my troop leader, she said, "No problem, you're going to sell cookies." And since I want to do everything, she said, "Well, you know, Sylvia, if you want to do everything, you're going to have to sell a lot of cookies." And that just seemed such a big challenge. But then she taught me one of the things that has changed my life forever. And that's how to create opportunity. That's how to make your dreams come true. State your goal. What's your dream? And then break it down into achievable steps. And then as you work really hard on every one of those steps, when you get stuck, ask for help. Now, for all of those us in this room, gosh, we all know how to do that. But to somebody raised in poverty, somebody who's had so many challenges, their families had challenges in their life, if you knew how to create those opportunities, you wouldn't be in that situation. So for me, that was a huge, huge lesson of how to create opportunity. But the other thing she taught me, which was just as valuable, was to never walk away from a sale until you've heard no 3 times. Now, for somebody being raised in a Mexican household, a Spanish-speaking household, one of the qualities that is praised as a child is to be quiet, not to interrupt, educate, your adults. So that's kind of hard to sell a lot of cookies if you can't initiate a conversation with adults. So that lesson really taught me how to engage others, especially people who are basically strangers. And the first time one of them told me no, when I asked them if they wanted to buy cookies, I remember standing there rooted in place with a thought bubble over my head that said, Troop Leader Mrs. Provine says, "Don't leave the side of the sale until you've heard no 3 times." So then I quickly improvised to try to figure out, how do I ask the question a different way? And they still said no. And finally I asked the question in another way, and they finally said, "Okay, yes, I'll buy a box of cookies." Yes. So that lesson taught me about persistence and resilience. So as that young 7-year-old in 2nd grade, I was starting to learn 2 important muscles: the muscle of how do you build opportunity, how do you make your dreams come true, and then the other one, which was the other muscle of persistence, resilience, getting to that goal. And I'm grateful for that because in fourth grade, my teacher, Mrs. Baldwin, showed us pictures of schools, of universities. And having grown up in the desert, when she showed the beautiful picture of Stanford with the red tile roof and limestone building and green verdant hills, I blurted out that I wanted to go there. And Mrs. Baldwin walked to my desk and said that I was a smart girl and I could go there. So as that 9-year-old girl in fourth grade, I made that decision. That was my dream. That was my goal. And I'm proud to say that I became one of the first Hispanics, male or female, to have gotten their graduate engineering degree from Stanford. And that happened because I knew how to create opportunities, knew how to set my goal and my dreams and then work it. The other one that came very handy was actually when I was a senior in high school and I signed up for college counseling. And I was sitting in the lobby and the college counselor opened the door and she saw me sitting there. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I signed up to go to college." And she looked at me and she said, "Girls like you don't go to college." Now that was statistically correct, but that's really harsh and nothing an educator should say. But remember, that was my first no. So what did I do? I stood up and I walked into her office. She had no choice but to follow me. And then she asked me, "Okay, what do you want to study?" And I said, "I want to be an engineer." And she just laughed. So what did I do? Took that as my second no, went on, became an engineer, became a rocket scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs and worked on 2 missions. And you might wonder, why did I want to be a rocket scientist? Why did I want to work for NASA? Well, again, there was this great volunteer, my troop leader for Girl Scouts, who saw me one day at camp, and she saw me looking at the stars. And back then, those were just twinkly lights. I didn't know that they were anything but just some twinkly lights up there. But she taught me that there were planets, there were stars, there were constellations, there were shooting stars. And I really became fascinated with everything with space. She remembered that. And so she encouraged me to earn my science badge doing something with space. And I'm so grateful that she did, because I made an Estes rocket and I failed multiple times. But because I was in that all-girl environment where failure wasn't really bad. Failure is first attempt in learning. Success was not an option. It was going to happen. And so I was allowed to fail. It wasn't like, "Oh, you're a girl, you tried it 3 times, you can't do it." It was, how do we get you to succeed? And I finally did. And when that rocket finally launched into that sky, beautiful blue New Mexico sky, I felt so much confidence. And I remember thinking, I can do math, I can do science. And as you all know, when a kid likes something, they'll do more of it. And the more they do it, the better it gets. And the better you get at it, the more you want to do that. And that knowledge of math has fueled my entire career and led me to have that amazing career that we talked about. So when you think about those things, having that educator or that volunteer who's interested in the student and sees their interest builds on that so that they become confident. And then with that confidence, they become competent. But not only that, building those muscles of opportunity. How do you create opportunity? And how do you persist and have resilience and become relentless to overcome challenges? Well, now you might be asking yourself, well, another question. Well, so, okay, so you've done those things. How are you giving back? And Susan mentioned the book, Path to the Stars. And I wrote that because when I would talk to students, they would look at me and stay. I remember one time the line was really long and I thought it was a line for food. And they go, "No, it's the line for kids to talk to you." And being an engineer, I said, that can't scale. I got to figure out a way to make sure that they can learn this story without having to have a personal interaction with me. So I wrote Path to the Stars and made sure it came out in Spanish as well, Camino a las Estrellas, at the same time. And my idea was make it a middle school book, because when you think about an elevator door closing and you put your hand in there, you want to stop it, because that's sort of like in middle school, that's kind of your last time that you can really reach kids to get excited and interested in math and science. And today, especially in the digital world we're creating, it's so important to have at least a modicum of experience and knowledge in math and science. You will have so many more opportunities. And that's why I wrote that book. But also when I became the CEO of Girl Scouts, the number one thing parents told me over and over is like, why should I have my daughter be in Girl Scouts? And they said, she's just going to sell cookies and make macaroni necklaces. And I took that as a personal challenge. And during my 4-year tenure, we created more than 146 badges and programs, more than any other time in the 100+ years of Girl Scouts legacy history. And, you know, those badges were things in entrepreneurship, in outdoors, snow camping, trailblazing, rock climbing, in civics, so very important, but also in STEM. Over 120 badges in STEM, everything from design thinking, data analytics, coding, robotics, cybersecurity, automotive engineering. And, you know, people said to me, you know, Sylvia, how are you going to get girls interested? Are they really going to do it? Well, I'm proud to say that in 2019, the last year I was in Girl Scouts, over 1 million STEM badges were earned, and over 180,000 of those were in cybersecurity. So Girl Scouts became the largest national program to reach girls in urban, suburban, and rural communities at scale with positive outcomes. And the way we did it is really back to that great lesson I learned in Head Start. Figure out what girls are interested in, build on that so they become confident and they become competent. And so people have challenged me and they said, oh, come on, really? But in cybersecurity, how do you get a cherubic brownie, a 7, 8-year-old girl interested in malware, right, and in viruses? Well, you meet them where they're interested and where girls are really interested. It isn't 7-year-old girls love to talk to one another. You get them in a circle and they talk with one another and you give them a ball of yarn. And as they pass that ball of yarn to one another, as they speak to one another, you see that they've created a physical network in just minutes. And then you introduce that, you know, Elke has spoken to Sigourney and Sigourney's spoken to Erica, but Erica and Elke haven't spoken to each other, but Elke had a virus. So even though Elke and Erica didn't speak to each other because they spoke to somebody else on that network, that malware, that virus spread. So very quickly, the girls go, oh, this is really interesting. It's relevant. And then building on that. And I'm so grateful that we did, because I heard from when I was in Birmingham, Alabama, parents came to me with their daughters and they said, my daughter got a full 4-year full ride scholarship on cybersecurity because of what she learned. And, you know, there was no other way in their rural community to have learned about cybersecurity. And so I felt really good about that because, again, that works. That interest, build on the interest, build confidence in there, and then they become incredibly competent. But it's important to let parents know how important this work is as well, and how important education and learning these skills can transform their child's life. And so I know that we were successful when one time I flew into Kansas after an ice storm. And I was, you know, really concerned there wasn't going to be very many people that showed up, but there were hundreds of girls that showed up. And I saw a parent standing on the side, and I said, "Hey, you know, welcome." And the mom said, pointing to the dad, and said, "You know, he drove 4 hours in an ice storm to be here." And I said, "Sir, you know, our Girl Scouts were all about safety." And he said, "You don't know much about Kansas, do you?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't." And he said, "Our heyday was during World War II, and there were plenty of jobs for everyone. But since then, all those jobs have gone, and it's decimated the middle class, and there's an opioid epidemic." And he said, "So what my daughter is learning here about STEM, about leadership, about getting a leg up on life, it's more dangerous for us not to be there." And I thought about how important that is to get the parents to understand, because every parent wants better for their children. They want their child to live their best potential. And so all of you are amazing educators, community leaders. You're here united, and it's that time because of, you know, yes, tremendous prosperity, but also a widening economic and disparity gap. And yes, the lingering effects of COVID. And so it's so important to accelerate what you're doing. And it's just like my pre-K teacher, my Head Start teacher, really look at your kids. Don't look at the labels. Don't put a label, poverty, gender, whatever. Look at the kid and see the tremendous potential they have. And think about what is it that they're interested in, and how can you hook that interest so that they become confident and then competent. And then make sure that they know that they can make their dreams come true. Break it up into little steps, work incredibly hard, and ask for help. And be that volunteer there to be that mentor, that guide that can help them. And then nothing like persistence, resilience, relentlessness. This is not easy work. It's over and over and over. It's repetitive, but it's so important. Never lose hope. Never give up. Every child has that potential to change their life and your life and the community. Well, I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to speak with you. When you look at the opportunities ahead of you in Central Texas, there's many challenges, but there's so many great opportunities. But what you're doing, that work that you have, I feel like it's not just an opportunity, it's an obligation. It's an obligation of the future of each of those children, but it's also an investment in your future. Investment in your future, because what you're doing in Central Texas will change their lives, improve the economic well-being, not just for them, but for all of you. And there will be a shared prosperity that is enjoyed and will continue to fuel the great economic story of Central Texas. Well, I want to thank you. It's quite an honor to have been the inaugural chair. I'm very proud of all of your success. Thank you for allowing me here. You've got a great leader in Susan Dawson, and I really appreciate everything you have done and continue to do. And I know that you can make those changes, because after all, it's not rocket science. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. I am so glad to be able to have you here today and to share your message of transformation, because that's what it's about. We often talk about that times of great change are the times of greatest opportunity. And if nothing else, we have lived through a lot of change in the last 18 months, but we have a lot of changes ahead of us as we think about how do we take the lessons from what we've experienced and build it into positive movement and opportunity going forward. And your story and your inspiration are the perfect foundation for moving us in that direction. So thank you. And we hope to see you back in Central Texas sometime soon. We have better margaritas than California does. There are some reasons to come back and see us. We appreciate it.